This is the Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 42, My Dang Bride, part 2.
Welcome to the Requiem Metal Podcast. That was a Kiss to Remember from a band you may have heard a few weeks ago called My Dying Bride. This is your host, Jason.
I'm Mark.
And I'm Chris.
Yeah, joining us again is Mr. Chris, who you heard on the last few weeks on our Dokken, Opeth, and Tiamat podcast. But as promised, we're back with part 2 of My Dying Bride, kind of the later years. And Kiss to Remember is from the record that I just seem to remember blowing up for My Dying Bride in a very popular sort of way, because this record, Like Gods of the Sun, which was put out, 96? I think it came out?
Yep.
96, again, on Peaceville, in case you didn't hear last time. This record was just huge because I think it wasn't as bleak as Angel in the Dark River. It had more sort of traditional song structures, a lot
shorter
more kind
songs.
of shorter songs. It kind of had that mid-90s sort of like rock vibe to it. I mean, this record, it was really easy to get a lot of like kind of non-traditional metal people into the My Dying Bride through this record, I think, you know.
It was like their next big, I think, benchmark after they did Turn Loose the Swans.
Yeah, it was kind of
It's like what could
the
they
next
really
evolution
do after this? That's kind of where I think a lot of people were at.
Yeah.
I think they might have even thought that themselves with what the direction went.
It was very stripped down in a way. I mean, even though like you heard on a song like A Kiss to Remember, you know, certainly really amazing interplay between the guitar and the vocals, but it was more simplistic than what you had heard on previous records. Mm-hmm. They went for like simpler, heavier riffs almost. You know, It was like there was more depth in a way to what they were doing, less sort of abstract, classical kind of, you know, orchestrations. So,
I think with that, I think it was less Angel in the Dark River and more something new. They sort of focused a bit more and I think matured a bit more. Instead of sort of having these really open pastoral songs, I think they made something that was a little more concrete and recognizable to people that weren't familiar with My Dying Bride or weren't familiar with these long movements, this very melodramatic, very dark atmosphere. And in fact, it was more gothic rock or gothic metal, which was more identifiable to people from the gothic, outside the metal world, more identifiable with people from the gothic rock scene.
Sure, this definitely could have tapped into people that were digging on what Typo Negative was doing, or even like what Nine Inch Nails, and I mean, a lot of like, you know, it really could bring in a diverse crowd with songs like this.
People that were into the 4AD, or not the 4AD label, but the Project label, Lycia, stuff
Love
like
Spirals
that.
Downward.
So I think you started to see a confluence of people from different genres appreciating My Dying Bride or getting into My Dying Bride. And I think Rolling Stone even called it like the Bram Stoker's Dracula for the ears or something like that back in '94. And for My Dying Bride to get quoted by Rolling Stone was actually a pretty big deal for the time. Mm-hmm. Before that they were covered in the sort of the usual underground mainstream magazines, but they rarely sort of bubbled above those magazines into the mainstream. And this was kind of the first album that really pushed them into the mainstream.
Yeah, and if you haven't, you know, if for some reason you didn't hear part 1, you know, My Dying Bride is a British doom metal band, part of the Peaceful 3 along with Anathema, Paradise Lost, and we've sort of moved up through the early years of them already, and by now they've kind of abandoned the death vocals and they've gone into more, like we said, traditional song structures.
I mean, they're taking a similar road that Paradise Lost took, really.
Well, I was just going to say that this was a really interesting time for metal in a lot of ways, because this is where, you know, essentially death metal, first generation, even their second generation, has kind of played itself out. You know, this is right after Slaughter of the Soul has come out. Yeah. Carcass is basically broken up at this point. A lot of the Earache Columbia deals sort of gone sour, you know, in a way.
This is the same era as Host, isn't it, from Paradise Lost?
No, this is more 1 second. This is 1 second era, you know, and this is when Anathema is doing Eternity, which was their kind of like very out there Pink Floyd kind of really quiet record in a way, you know. And so this is a really strange time, especially for British stuff. I mean, Napalm Death was writing like catchy tunes, you know, with diatribes and stuff. I mean,
it's like they're all like, you know, graduated from high school and they went to college and they want to experiment, and now they're going to figure out where they're going to go for the rest of their life.
Yeah. And really, I mean, I don't know. For me, this was the second record I heard from them, and of course I was all about it because I didn't care what the past was. You know, I wasn't looking at it through historical lenses. But do you feel like people got left behind with this record? Were there a lot of people that kind of turned?
If people got left behind, they got left behind with Angel.
So you think it was the same kind of crowd was kind of globbing onto this at this point?
I think the people that stayed with Angel stayed with Like Gods of the Sun, and then with that you had a whole bunch of new people coming on that were getting exposed to them, you know, especially in the U.S. through mainstream coverage, whether it be through magazines, newspapers, or whatever. So in touring, I think they did their first U.S. tour with Dio.
Dio, which we all saw.
Which we all went to. So I think that, they became more of a band, an international band at this point, than a band from England who happened to import records to various countries around the world. And I think they had U.S. label support behind them. Peaceville wasn't just an import label. Although I think we all have the Digipack version with the die-cut butterfly, and we thought that was the bee's knees back in the day. But Futurist, I believe, was the label behind them, and they were labeled in New York, and they put a lot of energy and effort into building My Dying Bride as sort of the next big thing in gothic rock or gothic metal. And it kind of worked for a short while.
I was gonna say, but then My Dying Bride almost kind of took a little dump on that with 34% in a way. They almost were sort of like saying, screw you, we're not going to be that band for you, Yeah,
I think it was just, I don't know if it's necessarily a glut of touring or anything, but it just seemed like they needed to really kind of experiment and just do something completely different. And I think they did some really interesting stuff on their album. It's really kind of polarizing for fans, but
I'd say 34%.
Yeah,
34.
Not that I want to jump too far ahead, but I was just saying that it was almost sort of a short-lived sort of success because that was such a polarizing record for a lot of people that a lot of the new fans that had been attracted on here kind of abandoned.
Well, I think
Bride.
34 is even more of a mainstream record.
Oh yeah,
for sure. But it's kind of all over the place. But it's about, I'd say it's 80% pretty awesome, in my opinion.
And 20% is pretty rotten.
Right. I mean,
so, but we'll get into that
maybe
later.
34% bad.
Maybe that's what the 34.
0.788%.
Yes.
Thank you, Chris. Chris is a math major, so
Far from it.
I could tell you pi to like 6 or 7 digits if you really want to know, but I won't do that to the Requiem crowd.
People's
another
eyes are going to glaze over when you get past the 4th digit.
But I wanted to talk about the concert experience because that was a sort of a unique thing. We kind of all laughed. This is one of the first concerts I attended with you guys. I was still in high school, and myself and another friend came, and we were sort of glazed over. We were like, oh my gosh, because you guys were getting in early to interview the band, and I remember. Who did you guys sit down with? Do you remember?
It was Andrew.
It was Andrew. Yeah. Okay, and
guitar player.
We was at a bowling alley outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is where we had seen At the Gates that earlier that summer, right?
It wasn't the same venue.
Oh, I know, but I'm saying Grand Rapids, Michigan. For the people that have listened to the podcast, when we did the podcast with Albert and we're talking about seeing At the Gates back in the day, it was at the Reptile House in Grand Rapids.
Right,
but
this was at a venue, I can't remember the name.
Yeah, it was just some crappy
which
bowling
I'm sure
alley.
doesn't really promote shows anymore. But
So the weird thing about this was, one, they were touring with Dio, which at the time we could care less about.
was this like the Lock Up the Wolves era deal?
No, this is far past that.
Oh no, this is like Angry Machines deal.
Yeah. Angry Machines, or the one that had
almost positive
Strange
Angry
Highways.
Machines, 'cause
Strange Highways was 94 with Evolution.
Yeah, I remember the press pass that we had the Angry Machines like crap.
I'm pretty sure this was this definitely was Angry Machines, as awful as that was, because this was what 96, 97.
Yeah,
I think
96.
Yeah.
So this is Angry Machines.
Yep, good memory.
I know my Dio.
There you go.
And the crappy album covers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The funny part about this is that we couldn't get in when you guys were doing the interview, so we had to go like wander the streets of Grand Rapids just looking for something to do.
Well, I'm going to stop you there, honey, just because we have a couple of podcasts coming up. Jeff Pilson played bass on that record.
Oh, on that Dio record?
Yeah.
Oh,
Anyway.
Interesting. Which, of course, last week you heard us do Dokken, so there you go. There's your connecting component. So
6 degrees.
yeah, wow, crazy. And so we kind of wandered around a little bit, and then when it was finally time to go in, you guys had the 2 press passes, and they were the sticker press passes, and there was myself, one of your guys' friends,
right,
and then one of my friends, and you two obviously had them. And Mark already sort of went in early, and then Chris kind of was standing in line, and you would tear off the pass and hand it behind, and we would just stick it, and the guy would look at us, and then we'd just kind of do this little trail of tears, if you will. It was pretty funny.
Right.
And
I think what happened was if something like that happened, I think what happened, we both got issued a press pass, and it was a sticker you put on your shirt, and so they can see it and whatever. There were 2 of them, so we both went in. We took one of the stickers from Mark or myself, went back out with the sticker on me and the additional sticker. Then we let another person in. That's how it went.
Yeah.
So then both people would go in, one person peel a sticker off, go out, But
See,
there was a point there. But there was a point where you were actually peeling off a sticker and giving it to Aaron,
person right behind me. Yeah.
behind you, right? While you were in line, and, it was sort of the thing. Why we were doing this is not because we didn't want to pay.
Didn't
for
you
it.
guys get promised extra or something
No,
like that?
no. We got we got two, and we sort of driven there without buying tickets in advance. And when we got there, we looked at the marquee, and Ed said Dio, and no My Dying Bride, it just said Dio, and then underneath it said sold out. And I remember being like, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
So we originally thought that we could get everyone inside the venue, sort of doing this interview sort of thing. Here's 5 guys going in to do this interview with this one guy from My Dying Bride.
And they kind of were like, what are you doing?
So while we're doing the interview, I think they started ushering some of us out. So basically the guys without the press passes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how this whole thing started, was the fact that the venue was sold out.
Yeah.
Good for Dio, good for My Dying Bride, but bad for us at the time. And of course,
So sorry, Dio, we stole money from you. We owe you like $30 or something, but
well,
Actually, we don't, because we didn't stick around to watch him.
Oh, that's true. That's true. We did
is kinda
leave.
stupid.
I remember Dio floating by. Do you remember? He almost looked like he was floating in that cloak.
Yeah, he had
all 4'8" of him.
it was either
Just-
a black or purple cape, and
Yeah, it
he was completely covered. He had a cowl on. You couldn't see his face, couldn't see his hair. He looked like
He's like a
Orko.
Jawa or something. But anyways, the other funny part of the story was that after the show we were hanging out with Bride while Dio was sort of playing, and you and I, Mark and I in particular, were talking with Andrew for quite a while about alien abductions and all kinds of bizarre stuff, and then they were kind of like, it was time for them to go, and they kind of looked at us and they're like, can you guys help us load our equipment on the tour bus? And
Sure.
So we ended up being key grips for a little
We were
while.
temp roadies.
Yeah, temp roadies. So yeah,
I'm sure they appreciate it. And they had to load. I think at the time they had to load all their own gear, and when
was
they had
just
a
in
couple
van,
of
wasn't it?
It was a van. Yeah, it was probably a van with a
There were
trailer
like
at the
6
back.
guys in it.
I'm sure once they realized they had a couple of wide-eyed Americans who really appreciated what they did, they sort of took the initiative to ask us to help them out, which we of course did, just because we were.
Was that the show that Martin got one of his violins stolen? Like that leg of the tour?
Probably, I don't remember.
And then it got
that.
returned to him. Or so. I remember talking to him a little bit, but
Yeah,
I remember though they did remember us because I saw them play in Italy a few years later, and they remembered who I was when I kind of gave them some back context. Oh yeah, from the Requiem. I said yeah.
it's kind of like Paradise Lost, remembering that Mark and I were the only 2 dudes at the Creator Morbid Angel show at Blondie's in Detroit.
Yeah,
But we
which,
headbanged.
which they ranked as the worst show in Paradise Lost history.
Exactly,
Yeah,
right.
so-
Yeah, I think it was Aaron 80 who ranked it as the worst Paradise Lost show ever. We just happened to be in front, the only 2 guys in front.
when what is it? Creator played. We sat at the bar with Aaron 80 and talked for 45
while
minutes or something.
While he probably hit on some Detroit floozy.
Awesome.
Yeah, Floozy's being generous there.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, since we spoke so highly of the record, let's hear some more songs. We're gonna hear "Dark Caress," "Here in the Throat," and "For You" from Light Gods of the Sun. And in particular, pay attention to, as we mentioned in the last podcast we did with Bride, the pinch harmonics in "Dark Caress." It's sort of a trademark of this song, and it's about vampires. So
Bram Stoker. Rolling Stone.
there you go. You're a smart man for remembering that.
This twisted life is cruel. I'm so
That was For You, Here in the Throat, and Dark Caress, all from Like Gods of the Sun. And now, as we kind of alluded to in the last talk set, we're kind of moving to the controversial era of My Dying Bride for a lot of fans as they started experimenting with trip hop. I mean, they did the Portishead cover, and then a lot of people have said that 34.788% is very much kind of has some tricky movements to it and some just
electro, and the cover obviously was a dead giveaway that something was amiss.
Yeah.
The title was a dead giveaway that something was amiss.
We've lost some of our members.
Yeah.
Rick the drummer's gone.
Rick
due to
illness, and they brought in. You said Bill. What was his name?
Bill Law.
Bill Law from Dominion. Okay.
And you also saw the departure of Martin Powell.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
Martin Powell left.
Had been gone as well.
Yep. And then even though he's part of this recording, soon after this recording, Calvin's going to leave.
Yep.
And not replaced on this record or on the next one, I think, because
Andrew does everything on the Light of the World.
Yeah,
Or Light at the End of the World.
So big changes. This is a sort of Andrew was the only guitar player on.
Nope, he's not. He's still on Light at the End of the World.
Calvin is?
Calvin and Andy Anderson. And then on the next one, the Dread Flowers, that's when Hamish.
I think he must have left on Light at the End of the World or right after the recording because he's not in the booklet.
I think it says, it doesn't say in there like rhythm guitar played by.
Oh, okay,
But he's
played
not
by
a full
Calvin.
member of the
Okay,
band.
so he must have
I
quit
think I
during
remember
or
that.
right after.
Probably shortly
and
after it. And,
Yeah, just because he wasn't in the booklet. That's the only reason I claimed he wasn't on that. So,
Yeah.
so we're dealing with a very transitional time period of My Dying Bride,
Yeah.
and there was a lot of people like Chris and myself who really walked away from the band for a while because of this record, and you kind of
I was a lone hanger on, I guess.
yeah, and. I mean, what are your thoughts when you first kind of got this record? Because I didn't hear this till years later, until you played it for me in the 2000, 2001. 3-4 years later.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I had it, and I don't think I really listened to it that much. I think I did just kind of like listen to it once, like, oh, that's kind of weird, I'll shelve it. And then it was one of those things where I used to go through a phase where every couple weeks I'd like listen to an entire back catalog of a band. Like today I'm going to listen to every single Dismember record back to back or whatever. So
Yeah.
going through and a lot of the songs kind of
Well, I remember
my interest a little bit. Some of the stuff like Base Level Erotica is pretty really suggestive, kind of sleazy, almost like techno trance song, which is not a very good song on that.
Well, and Heroin Chic in particular was a pretty controversial song, wasn't it, Chris? I mean, I remember that was the one that you would always sort of like blister, it bothered you to hear the song.
I mean, it wasn't really the song. I think it was everything in its entirety. I think that there were a couple songs in there that are very My Dying Bride, but I think the whole product didn't seem like it seemed very disingenuous to me, because it didn't seem like they were continuing anything. It was almost like a hard stop for My Dying Bride and a hard stop for their fan base as well, because I think a lot of people, when they got that album, whether they got it as a promo for the press or they bought it, they felt it wasn't what they were familiar with. In fact, it was in some regards, but at the same time, it was a hard stop. It was a period. It was a point where they said, we're going to do My Dying Bride, but we're going to do it on our own terms and through our own lenses. And I think,
I think that's fine for bands to do what they want instead of what the fans kind of want. But as far as
This is
tonality,
this is along the lines when Host was coming out from Paradise Lost, right around that era as well.
I think it's less divisive
but I think
than Host.
the connection between those two things, I think, are very tenuous.
Tenuous at best.
Yeah. I think the connection is tenuous. The fact that both bands are exploring more electronic things were more of a sign of the times rather than they were sort of doing things in parallel because...
Yeah, I don't think there's any link at all. It was just a coincidence that they were both at that kind of level. But tonality, I think, they still kind of keep the moroseness that they established, but yet it's not this gothic, romantic, big epic struggle thing. It's more like, everyday kind of kind of subject matter they're pulling in here. So
And this was a time too when in popular music, you know, Radiohead had put out OK Computer, Portishead was getting quite big critically, you know, and I mean, there were dark elements to Radiohead and dark elements to Portishead,
Oh, yeah.
and you know, like even bands like Dillinger Escape Plan, when I interviewed them years ago, said, "Oh, that's what we listen to constantly."
Right.
So I think there were a lot of metal bands that was really stepping out of the metal realm and listening to a lot of these other acts and trying to incorporate a lot of that stuff into their music. You
that
know?
was a big lull period, really. for metal.
97, 98 was a really ghost town kind of for metal in a weird way. I mean, there were a few black metal bands that were doing kind of a couple interesting things here and there, but it was I guess what you could say is
You had to dig deeper to find stuff.
well, the big bands weren't reliable anymore, you know, in a
Right.
lot of ways.
The bands that you'd liked for a long period of time had gone on to do different things.
Alternative 4 from Anathema was coming out around this time, you
Right.
know,
I
which
mean,
was
so there were records like this one that weren't really in line with your expectations, you know. And as such, you felt that My Dying Bride and other bands like My Dying Bride weren't sort of managing your expectations how you wanted them to, you know. And with that, you sort of walked, like you said, you kind of walked away from. I didn't necessarily walk away from them, but I did the same thing with Alternative 4. I didn't think it was a strong record, and I just said, I'll not buy this immediately or get this as a promo. If I get it as a promo, I'll give it to someone who really wants it, and I'll wait to see what they do next. And years later, you end up picking it back up, and you say, okay, these are good records, but you can they still sort of disconnect for you, and for the most part. I mean, I think that record is probably my least favorite out of the discography.
yeah. What do you remember what the title was a reference to? So odd title 34.78% complete.
Should
So,
look that.
yeah, I
I can't
mean,
remember if they made it up. To be
like Day
honest.
of or something like, we need a title. Let's call it something
It's
weird.
probably some completely obtuse
Yeah.
reference.
Well,
guessing, but-
we're going to hear a song from this record, and it's probably the strongest song on the record, Under Your Wings and Into Your Arms.
That's the most common. It's the record that has the most My Dying Bride elements to it.
Oh, the song, you mean?
The song itself,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, for sure. I mean, it's the most identifiable, in a way, and it kind of helps keep
And I
that.
actually think that
Apocalypse Woman was another one
Apocalypse
we were really
Woman,
into.
the stance of Evander Sinike or whatever.
That was a cool
and
tune.
The Horde, the Hook, and the Mother is a pretty strong song. It's very, very stripped down and not at all what you're expecting for subject matter, but
But again, it's something like Chris said. In hindsight, you go back and you go, okay, this is better than I thought it was, but it did feel odd if you listen to it in terms of the flow of what the band was
this
doing.
probably would have been better services if they went with their EP.
Yeah, this would have made a great
could
EP,
have been a good
an
EP.
experimental kind of thing.
If you took
Sure, but
40
it's
songs
a
off
full
it.
record. And I think if I remember correctly, there's a couple of things with this record. I think there's a Blade Runner connection to one of the songs, maybe the Hook, the Horde, the Cook, and the Mother.
That was actually I think they turned that from, was that actually Blade Runner, or was that it was like the 3 different services of a woman?
Yeah, that's what that was the Catholic kind of.
Yeah.
Right, but I can't remember if there was a Blade Runner connection.
I think, I do remember.
Apocalypse Woman? That could have been a Blade
Yeah.
Runner connection. Yeah.
And I think the album title had to do something with Calvin, but
Oh, did it?
Yeah, I can't remember quite what it was.
He just
look it
got
up. I'm
DSL
sure it's.
and he was trying to download a full album.
He had AOL. He had
That's
AOL.
where it kept kicking him
Yeah.
off at
Yeah.
34.70.
Right, he was trying to download the new Tricky album.
Maybe. Well, and then a few years passed, and the next record that we'll hear after we hear Under the Wings that you'll hear in this set is Light at the End of the World, and that record for a lot of people like myself kind of felt like a comeback record in a way, and not just that, but you'll hear in She Is the Dark kind of a special element that really hadn't been heard since the EP of '94.
Yeah.
And we won't give that away, but I'm sure you'll hear it in the song. And so we're going to hear Under the Wings and Into Your Arms, She Is the Dark, and then we're going to end things with the ISIS script. So enjoy some 34% and some Light at the End of the World from My Dying Bride.
I need to see a sign. cruel sleep cross our land, all winter and die. As they fall, the victims they die. A sad death in our land. We lay down and suffer again. A dark girl across our land is pacing, is praying, and with her a fever, a marching black fever. No I see, no features, just black form suffering. Seeking to
You just heard the ISIS script, She is the Dark, and Under Your Wings and Into Your Arms. And of course, you may have noticed musically some dynamic things in those last two songs in particular. A lot of people really saw this record, and in particular that song, She is the Dark, which opens the whole album as kind of the, we're back, Aaron going back to the death metal vocals.
Well, we've got the original logo again.
Yep, original logo. Another Sear Me, Part 3, the third Sear Me.
If you couldn't get
Indeed.
enough.
If you can believe.
I mean, and again, I think that was a very, intentional to sort of, tell people, hey, you can come back to My Dying Bride if you didn't really like what we were doing last record. Look, we threw another Sear Me on there for you.
The whole Sear Me thing, it's not as effective as what I think Bolt Thrower did with like their,
continuation.
Well, the Cenotaph, or the
World Eater,
Cenotaph, and then Embers.
Embers,
yeah.
Because that was just that little movement, but Sear Me is just kind of like, okay, I've heard it already.
Same thing over and over.
And I can't even remember what Sear Me 3 is compared to the other Sear Me's.
Well, I think this Sear Me had the original violin intro from the first Sear Me.
Oh, okay.
So they're tying it all together.
And the guy doing the keyboards and violins for this record was the guy from
Battle Saga.
Battle Sagoth. Yeah, I almost mispronounced it.
Right.
We'll keep it PG for you kids.
Right.
And also Sean Steels from an ex-Anathema drummer is back on.
He played on Alternative 4, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yep. So, and this is where, essentially at the end of this recording, there's only one guitarist left, and that's Andrew. So we're down to a 4-piece at this point: Aid, Aaron, Andrew, and now the new drummer Sean. So
Andrew's kind of always been the primary songwriter.
That's right.
He?
Yep.
So.
He is.
And he's still there today, correct?
Yes.
Is it just Aaron and Andrew that have survived, or is Aid still there?
Adrian's still there.
Okay, I couldn't remember.
Didn't he just leave this year?
In 07.
Oh,
back.
he did. He's
Is
back,
he back?
now? Oh, I don't know. Oh, but you're saying in terms of the recordings we're going to hear, he's consistent with them.
He left the band 2 years ago or something
Okay,
like that,
gotcha.
in 2007. But he's still in the band at this point in their record, in their career.
What do you remember about this, getting this at the time? I mean, other than like feeling that sense of like, whoa, this is good again,
That was my feeling. I mean, that was the overwhelming feeling that My Dying Bride had returned. They had sort of went from not managing my expectations of what they should be to managing their expectations. Now I realize that's a bit selfish, but at the same time, you become familiar with it, you get emotionally involved in it, and therefore you have a sense of ownership, which, true or untrue, whatever. But I felt that this was probably one of the strongest My Dying Bride records in a long time. The return of Aaron as a death metal vocalist, and he's always had a unique style, something that we discussed early on. Unique style, and that style returned. And I think that they were writing better songs. They had a better idea of what they were doing. And in fact, I think what Light at the End of the World is really a mix of two of their strongest albums. Turn Loose the Swans and
Like Gods?
Like Gods of the Sun. And I think those two albums put together ultimately equal Light at the End of the World.
Yeah.
And I think, as a fan, I mean, you couldn't ask for more when they combine two of your favorite records in some way, shape, or form, and make it sound, like doom metal, doom death metal.
Now, myself in particular, like I feel like this is great, the record, but I feel like they took this formula and did it better on the next record, Dreadful Hours, which for me, I prefer this to Light at the End of the World for whatever reasons. I don't know why.
Just to dissent here a little bit from everybody else, I had, when I first heard the record, I was like, okay, it's cool, it's sounding like what I expected, but I was like, I kind of wanted something more. It seemed like they fell back on what they knew. They weren't pushing themselves too much,
And that's where, like,
outside of refining, the riffs and whatnot, but...
And that's where I feel like Dreadful Hours to me was like, it was a little bit more experimental in some ways than what Light at the End of the World was, but it took some of those elements. Aaron's still doing the trade off between the death
and going
clean.
back, it's compared to some of the later output they've had. This is that's a really strong record, but as far as like remembering my experience with them, the record seemed like a little bit of a letdown.
Well, and you were
That's
really
'cause
into 34%.
You continued with them, whereas I didn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the holder on, the people that hung on didn't get the payoff that the people that
Right, you were expecting something more experimental or more, continuation of that.
But they satiate a lot of those things with later records. So
And it seems like right around this time they were kind of like there was like a renaissance of My Dying Bride. They put out the two Meisterwerk records. When did they
a
put?
renaissance or a glut, depending on.
Yeah, I mean,
those were Meisterwork records are cool just because it was kind of like, hey, here's the best of My Dying Bride in two
Well, there's
volumes.
some rarities and it
The
was
demos and stuff, and-
some covers. The Lee Hazelwood, Nancy Sinatra, cover.
Well, you
and
get covers and you get all that
Portishead
stuff, but at the
cover,
same, when you have all the stuff before it, you're kind of like, is this really necessary?
Sure.
But when you're a fan, you're a completist, and you see that they're digipack. Digipacks again are kind of like, ooh, wow.
Yeah,
Cloth.
and when you work at a record store,
They're like
well,
chromium
it's
covers
only-
for comics.
Jeez, yeah.
Hologram covers for comics,
Right. I mean, I don't think the artwork in them on those records is great. I think it's actually kind of crappy.
It's better than the Dreadful Hours.
No.
You don't think so?
No. Looks like someone.
I think the
looks like
Dreadful
someone
Hours looks
pooed
like-
pooed on a platter and took a picture of it, and then blurred it. Put a I
don't think they were that bad.
Put a motion blur on it, and then colored it green.
Yeah.
Put a My Dying Bride logo with an embossed filter on it.
I guess the Dreadful Hours cover is interesting in its own right. It's just unique. I don't know.
It's okay.
What would you? You're the artist. So where's your
when I first saw it, I was like, oh wow, Aaron just figured out how to use Photoshop.
yeah.
But I prefer the stuff he did analog. I don't think a lot of things in Photoshop, if you don't understand how to do things in the real world with photography, you end up doing really stupid choices, like using an emboss filter, using a lot of blurs and things like that don't work. But
It looks like he wanted to make like something from that you would see in the inside of like one of the first couple Morbid Angel records. Or
see,
something.
I like the imagery, but I think the execution's horrible.
Yeah.
If it would just been like a 2-color thing, I think it would have been a lot more effective.
I think Jason and I were talking about this before we actually started this podcast. Is that we both think the cover is like there's something not right about it. Like whether it's the execution, like Mark talks about, it has a juvenile kind of aspect.
But yeah, it's unsettling in a way.
In a way, it almost looks like as if like a kid has sort of envisioned this.
Yeah,
and
like a vision of like a demon coming down and
possessing a kid or a person. This is something whether it's dad or whatever metaphor you want to throw or however you want to read into this. It's actually kind of harrowing in some way. I mean,
it's like archaic medieval art or something.
right. I mean, the color tones are kind of peculiar. The grass is green. The skies is sort of multicolor orange and reds and blacks.
Apocalyptic orange, I think, is what the Crayola color is.
That's probably appropriate for this cover. Apocalyptic orange, yes. And then you have this sort of demon where you can see the skeleton, but at the same time you can see sort of wings, which looks like a raven behind it.
It's almost like a
Shadows
silhouette
and
that you chopped
things,
in half and you see the silhouette skeleton or something.
Right.
It looks sort of like what Jeepers Creepers villain should have looked like had it been a lot cooler. Remember how cool that movie was for like the first half hour, and
Until
then
you
you saw it, and
yeah,
you're like, "Wow, this sucks." So,
Exactly,
yeah.
right. But I think this record, the cover is interesting. Something's not right about it, probably execution. But at the same time, there is something unsettling about it. It's something you kind of go, I don't feel comfortable looking at this for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
There really isn't a facial expression, but something draws you in and makes you feel a little uncomfortable.
I think I actually prefer the back cover.
Yeah, the back's pretty interesting. You kind of see in the inside. It's again just another kind of possession-like scene of some sort.
I just didn't like the color combinations.
Yeah,
the blue and the white person on the ground. I kind of prefer the darker thing here because it's a little more subtle.
And the record we've been talking about, that we're going to play a song from La
We've done the
Figle,
art thesis on
La
it.
Figli della Tempesta. It's a really interesting record. It came out in 2001, and one of the things also, we saw the re-recording or the part 3 of Sear Me on the last record. They actually do a re-recording of The Return to the Beautiful, which was from As the Flower Withers on this. So that was kind of cool.
Another re-recording.
Yeah, so you're seeing something consistent with My Dying Bride here.
Right.
They milk it a little bit sometimes.
And we're gonna hear that tune, and we're also gonna hear a song from their latest record called "To Remain Tuneless," and we'll talk a little bit about their last 2 records when we come back in our final talk set. So,
And this is the first album to feature second guitar player Hamish Glenn Cross. Just in case we want to tile his members leaving and coming.
Yeah.
And I think the keyboardist was Yasmin something.
Yasmin Ahmed,
Yeah.
I think.
So,
Yasmin St. John.
Except for yes,
so you have all these you have new members coming in.
Yasmin Blythe,
But ultimately,
Baywatch.
it is Aaron, it is Andrew. This is their. I think at this point, this is their baby, and they're kind of going with it.
I think they've always kind of been the creative force behind the band. What do you think?
Sure.
Visually and everything else.
Right.
Cool. All right, enjoy La Figle della Tempesta and To Remain Tuneless. That was To Remain Tombless and La Figle della Tempesta, which I believe is Italian for
It's a love song about Joey Tempesta, I think.
Joy Tempesta. Yeah.
You really? Oh, I didn't know that. Oh.
So, yeah, you heard it here first on Requiem Metal Podcast, but
We exposed the truth.
we're like Fox News.
The false truth.
Our truth.
To Remain Tombless was a song, we actually kind of went a little out of order here. It's actually a song from their last record that they put out in 07, correct?
Yep.
I think, yeah, A Line of Deathless Kings, which, interesting.
06, actually.
06 it came out? Okay, because, yeah, it was recorded in June of 06. I think it was late 06, early 07. And Mark has a nice little box.
Yeah, and to go back to when we talked about Turn Loose the Swans having different album covers, this
Right.
has a different album cover
Yeah.
than the Jewel case.
That's right. Yeah, the
Yeah.
limited edition has this neat box, sort of.
They did it with Dark Throne, The Cult is Alive, too. It's just like, it's a CD-shaped box that you
Right.
pop open. It's got like postcards in it.
Kind of looks like the Catatonia Black Sessions box, for those of you who
Right.
have that. You know. So Peaceful obviously went through a box period of like 06
Sure.
and 07.
Yep.
So.
We call that the Peaceful Box.
Yeah, kind of like the Image Marvel Comics Chromium.
Now it's the
hologram.
super Jewel case or whatever.
Yeah.
Box in a box.
Yeah, exactly. But their last two records, kind of have like a connection in a way musically, I would say.
Yeah.
We're talking about Songs of Darkness, Words of Light, which was 04, right? I think. Yeah, 04 on Peaceful. And this is the last record for Sean Steele on drums. And then actually on the newest one, Line of Deathless Kings, it's John Bennett, which I don't know where he's from. He performed the drums on it. And they've got a full-time keyboardist simply named Sarah. I don't know where her last name is.
I don't think she's in the band anymore, is she?
Oh, okay. Is she gone now? So, but in particular on that To Remain Tombless tune, to me it's the most dynamic song of this record. The record seems pretty stock for My Dying Bride.
Yeah, the first track, though, I think it integrates like stuff they were doing on like Gods of the Sun and like some of their more aggressive stuff really, really well. Like getting those really great like vocal harmonies and stuff going on too. But
Right.
the rest of the albums, is kind of forgettable, really.
And
It's done well, it's just not done great.
yeah,
Yeah, if it's your first Bride record you've ever heard, it probably sounds fantastic, but
Right.
it seems a little.
Well, and it kind of reminds me of what we were talking about with the last Catatonia. It's great, but it feels like the end of an era, and
They've got
it's
to do
like
something-
It's time to do something kind of new. You've sort of polished that style of music now for 3-4 records, and now it's time to kind of really move on. Whereas like the album previous, Songs of Darkness, I felt was a lot stronger in terms of its vision. It had a more apocalyptic kind of like just. There, you and I noticed like
34% complete could have been if they stayed in the more death metal.
possibly,
album, I think.
yeah, and there's like a neurosis vibe to it in some
Yeah.
ways, just like a bleakness that you haven't heard really probably since Angel in the Dark River.
But it's a bleakness that's not completely based on melody. It's more based on like distortion and ambience and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
There's a dissonance to it, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you obviously prefer Songs of Darkness to the new one?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that I like both albums. That's Mark's hydraulic knee.
my iron lung.
So if you hear a hydraulic sound, that's Mark's knee.
No, that's been heard in many podcasts.
Okay, so your audience is very familiar with that. No, I think this record is definitely a darker record. I think it is a darker record, image-wise. The half-naked angel lady with her...
With half her head missing.
She's naked. Half her head is missing. Her eyes, which is kind of strange. But I think this record is the best record after Aaron sort of came back and started doing death vocals. I think they started incorporating more things that they haven't before. I don't really put a finger on it, but like you said, there's a dissonance to it. There's more noise. There's more sort of artifacts going on in the songs that sort of give you that doom and gloom atmosphere. So, as a record, I like it more. I think like songs like The Blue Lotus, Wreckage of My Flesh, and Catherine Blake are all very, very... Probably some of the strongest songs My Dying Bride has written in a long time.
In really the last 10 years.
Catherine Blake, they really they kind of add. That's almost like the most hybrid of everything on that record. Like really bringing in a lot of that stuff that they perfected back in the day, but still
Right.
throwing that dissonance back into it.
Right.
And for me, I like all those songs as well. But to me, the one song that really kind of stands out,
I would agree.
is the one that
This
we're
one's
going to
unreal.
close with, and it's the album closer, and it's going to be kind of our whole show closer, and really kind of bookends My Dying Bride's career in a way. And there's something kind of like apocalyptic about this song, about the 3.5-4 minute mark. The song starts to sort of take this really like a neurosis, kind of like just droning sort of doom,
It's just
march.
on the precipice of giving you that hook, but they just keep pulling back until it.
And then I compared it
punch
to
you.
like tantric doom or something like that. It finally gives it to you after about 3 minutes.
If that's your idea of tantric, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I'm just
Tantric doom.
yeah, 3 minute tantric doom.
Okay.
It's a short form, not the sting
The abbreviated
performance.
tantric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a cool song, and it's a neat thing to end with, and I think you'll agree as well. So let us know what you thought. Send us an email at requiemmetalpodcast@gmail.com.
Just Requiem Podcast at Gmail.
Requiem Podcast, yeah, I do that all the time.
requiempodcast@gmail.com.
Thanks. See, Chris, somebody's paying attention.
UIEM.
podcast@gmail.com, or drop us a line or comment at iTunes or at TalkShoe. So hopefully you've enjoyed part 2 of My Dying Bride as much as we have. Chris, again, it's been jolly having you here, fulfilling most of your contract.
Well,
Yeah, you still got
plenty more to go, apparently.
fulfilling your childhood dreams of, one day I want to grow up and do podcasts for My Dying Bride. So,
yes.
but all right, so thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mark.
And for podcast, it's Jason.
And this is Mark.
Enjoy a Doom Lover.
Our dreamless bed.